Welcome to another edition of the Lynn Lowdown. We have freelancer, high school sports reporter for the Boston Herald, Matt Feld. Matt, how are you?
Good. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm good. It's been a busy time for high school sports. You were at the MIA board meetings. You were keeping following up with that, and finally got some news on spring sports. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so schools a couple of weeks ago were pushed back by the governor to May 4th. They were originally scheduled to reopen next week, but of course, due to the coronavirus pandemic, they pushed that back to May 4th. So in line with that, the MIA decided to push the start of the spring sports season back to May 4th. They originally decided on an April 27th date a couple of weeks ago, but now that's pushed back to May 4th. And as a result, they've also pushed the end of the season back a week from June 20th to June 27th. So currently, if schools do go back in session on May 4th, spring sports will start on that day. Games can start 7 days later on May 11th, and then the season will end on June 27th.
Yeah, and that was the important thing. This is all pending if schools do start on May 4th.
That's right. Yeah, if schools don't start, if schools aren't open, they're not going to be any spring sports. So it's going to be tight now with the MIA pretty much saying that they're going to allow spring sports to take place if schools reopen. It's totally up to the governor and his office to determine whether or not it's safe enough for kids to go back to school when the beginning of May rolls around.
Yeah, and this is impacting a lot. Is a lot of seniors, especially this whole COVID-19 is impacting a lot of seniors, and I don't know. It's just hard times for them because this is their last year and they're not certain if they will have a chance to get on the baseball field, the track, or volleyball, or any of that.
Yeah, because the other day the NCAA announced that they're going to grant an extra year of eligibility to college spring athletes who missed their seasons this year. But of course, you can't do that with high school athletes. You can't give them another year. They can't go back to high school if they're seniors. So this has impacted hundreds, if not thousands, of athletes, not just in Massachusetts but across the country that are looking for another lacrosse game, another baseball game, another tennis match, track meet, what have you. And then so you kind of hope that if people are able to be responsible and be healthy and safe over these next couple of weeks, that schools are safe enough to reopen. And again, I think at this point, every kid, of course, wants to win a state championship. But I think a lot of those seniors, like you said, just want to be able to play another game. It doesn't matter really if it means something or if it doesn't mean anything. They just want to be able to get back on the field with their friends and compete.
Yeah, and how does it also impact practice time? Because they do have that certain time before the season starts to practice, but how does this impact their practice time before, if they get a season before it starts?
Yeah, so in the past, it was required that you needed 11 calendar days between the first tryout and your first competition, your first game. That's been reduced to 7 days as a result, due to the fact that because of the condensed schedule, the MIA realized that people are going to want to start playing as fast as possible. So for all sports, or for most sports, it'll be 7 days. For rugby, it's 9 days, and for golf, it's 3 practices. And so again, that's a reduction where you needed, almost a dozen practices in the past before you could start playing games. Now you only need 7, and that's so games can start as quickly as possible when May comes around.
What were some of the important outlines or the important votes that took place? What were some of the things in these votes that stood out to you?
So a couple of unique things is number one, there is going to be a postseason. No one really knows whether it's going to be a state tournament like we usually have or whether it's just going to be a sectional tournament. That's kind of depend on when they decide to end the regular season. They're still kind of figuring that date out. A big thing is that teams can play up to June 27th, whether they're in the playoffs or not. So if you didn't have a good regular season, you don't qualify for the tournament, you can still keep playing. And that's so that every kid, due to the condensed schedule, can play as many games as possible. And that's not just at the varsity level. Freshmen and junior varsity teams can do that as well. So teams, no matter whether you're in the tournament, out of the tournament, whether you're a lower level, can play up to June 27th. And that gives kids, the greatest chance possible to play as long as possible with the shortened schedule this spring. That was a big thing. The other thing is that, in the past, most teams would play a 20-game schedule. Most sports would have an 18 to 20-game schedule. Now, the minimum you can play is 8. The maximum you can play in the regular season is 12. And, of course, that's a big reduction because the MIA decided to keep guidelines on how many games you can play per week depending on your sport. For baseball, it's 3. For lacrosse, it's 3. And, you can go up and down the list. And that's the big thing is that in the past, teams could play up to 18 to 20 games, but because of the regular season is probably going to be only 5 weeks instead of 8 weeks. You can only play between 8 and 12 games.
Yeah, this is the part that stood out for me was the junior varsity ones, how they could play. They could extend their season. They could play a little longer. That's the one that stood out to me.
Yeah, and I think a big thing here too is, we talk about the seniors, of course, but I think this could have huge impacts, for athletic participation at the lower levels. If you're a freshman or sophomore and your spring season gets canceled, and your athletic season gets canceled, what are the odds that then you're going to come back out the next year when you haven't played sports in 2 years? So I think it's really important that, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids who are maybe just getting into really competitive athletics for the first time have the chance to play as long as possible to see if it's something that they want to do, and they can kind of get a better sense for community and what it's like to play for your school, play for your town. And again, if you lose that, I think that, that really has a big chance and a big impact on kids when they're that young and they're just starting to get accustomed to high school and kind of, being on their own a little bit more. So I think having the chance to have those younger kids play as long as the varsity kids deep into June, I think could have a huge impact down the line to make sure that those kids keep playing.
Yeah, and what impacts would it have for the fall? Because we don't know when this is going to be over, and football training starts around July, like end of July. They have their little practices around, before that. But the impact of the fall sports, what do you see that?
Yeah, and I think, you just mentioned it, right? Because the fall sports really start off before school starts. So if school starts the first week in September, kids are usually practicing for 2 or 3 weeks, before school starts. And I think a lot of people are concerned that because of the warmer weather, this could go away over the summer and potentially come back in the fall. Hopefully not as bad and not to such a high degree. But I think it's going to really stress, the fact that if there are still spring sports and they still are able to take place, that this summer people are still going to have to be safe. They're still going to have to do everything they can to social distance and, be responsible. So that when fall comes around, this does not come back to such a high degree because, like you said, man, if we can't start, football and soccer and golf and other fall sports, when we usually do the second, third week in August. And as you said, kids usually like to be active and practice even before then. You can't just push the football season off, a month and just like start practicing the first week in October.
Yeah.
It takes a couple of weeks for kids to, get ready and get in shape and get in physical shape, particularly in a sport like that. So I think it's going to be crucial that, again, everyone stays healthy over these next couple of months. And when the summer rolls around is responsible because, spring sports, certainly it's no fun to start late. But, there are some sports like football and probably hockey is also another one where you can't just pick up a pad, throw on some pads and play that first week. It doesn't really work like that.
Definitely not. And lastly, before we get you out of here, I think it was last month or a couple months ago, the MIA also voted on expanding a statewide tournament for basketball. Can you expound on that?
Yeah, statewide tournament for all sports.
All sports.
All sports, yeah. So, but there are a lot of people that do think the biggest influence will be in basketball. So currently now in most sports, there's sections. So there's a south section, there's a north section, there's a central section, there's a west section. And depending on your record, just based on straight record, you're seated in each of those sections. And then if you win your section, you play in the state semifinal and the state final. The state semifinal and then the state final. The statewide tournament will open the tournament up, so we'll get rid of the sections. Each team in each division, whether it's 3 divisions, 4 divisions, 5 divisions, depending on your sport, will be seeded 1 to 32, and then you'll just play 1 through 32, 2 versus 31, all the way down the line. And this is kind of made, this was kind of implemented to create a more equitable tournament format. In the past, teams in Eastern Mass usually had to play more games to get to the state final than teams in Central and Western Mass. There's been a long stretch of time where the South in particular has really dominated in a handful of sports. And basketball in the North has had a better success rate. Lynn English the last couple of years, Cambridge before then. But this was really made so there was a better, more equitable feeling across all sports that each team had an equal chance at a state championship. Everyone had to play the same amount of games. They had to play the same tough competition. Potentially down the line, you could get teams, playing in a state championship that really are the best teams in the state. I think a lot of people thought in boys basketball this year, Lynn English and Lowell were the 2 best teams in Massachusetts and probably should have been the state final. And instead, they had to play in a North sectional final, 3 games before the state final were to take place. So I think this is a chance to really be good for the state. I think it could draw a lot of interest. I think when people really see that as you get closer to the state final, the truly best teams are remaining, I think people will be really into it. And I think it has a chance to really boost enthusiasm and interest surrounding all sports, particularly, like you said, though, in basketball.
Yeah, it'll be like the kind of NCAA tournament.
Exactly, yeah. It'll be almost exactly like the NCAA tournament where, your Final Four could really be, the true best 4 teams in the state. Doesn't matter if they're all from the North, all from the South, doesn't matter. They've got a chance to be really exciting, though. I think a lot of people over the years would have loved to see, teams like Lynn English, Lowell, Cambridge, the BC Highs and Mansfields of the world being that Final Four. with a chance to go to the state championship. And I think now we might have a chance to have that happen.
And that will be implemented 2021 season?
Yeah, so not this fall, but the fall afterwards. So the fall of 2021. So we'll get one more year, hopefully, of the formats the way they are now in all sports. And then all sports will transition over to the statewide tournament format beginning in September of 2021.
All right, Matt, just let them know if they want to follow your work, tell them where to go. Plug your social media.
Yeah, for sure. My Twitter is Matty Feld 612. I write for the Boston Herald, and of course now we're trying to get out as much content as possible. So feel free to drop me any story ideas and my messages. My messages are open. My email is mattwfeld@gmail.com. Feel free to email any story ideas over there. We'll try to get them up and running, and of course hope everyone stays safe during that time.
All right, Matt. Thank you very much for this, man. You stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too, man. Thank you.
No problem.